So I've been learning to write a backend in Python and thought that I would share what I've learned so far. A little bit about me. I know how to code, obviously, but not in Python really. I've been over the years that my career spans across. I've been involved with quite a few languages and technologies, but Python has just never been one of them. Basically all I've known about Python is that it's that it's something like Ruby, used for learning for reasons I didn't quite understand, to be honest, and obviously an interpreted language. And I heard of Django, that you can actually use it to build backends using Django, and I heard of pip, that's kind of like, npm in the Python world. So but I dare to say that I know backend development. Things such as I don't know, like route handlers, request middleware using an ORM. ORM is always challenging things such as eager loadings, or sometimes called lazy loading, as N+1 problems when eager loading. What else is here? Rank queues, workers, some sort of tracing, observability. I dare to say that I'm familiar with all these things. So basically my situation was quite often was like, okay, I know what I want. I just want to know how to do it in Python, and out of all the options that are out there, what is the thing to choose? I took a look at Django, and a source of inspiration for me was a company called Django, and one of sources of inspiration for me was a company called Posthoc that does, well, a lot of things these days, but it's an analytics solution, a combination of Mixpanel and others. And what's interesting about Posthoc is that it's actually open source. So you can take a look at their main repo, and you can tell that it's a monorepo that contains their front end written in React using TypeScript, and backend written in Python. I was like, okay, fair. Another source of inspiration for me was a company called Polar that is kind of like Stripe, competing with Stripe. And it's also open source with backend written in Python. And very similar situation in monorepo with a React frontend and Python backend, with the difference that Polar is not using Django, it's using a more modern framework called FastAPI. So let's read a bit about it. FastAPI is a modern, fast, high-performance web framework for building APIs with Python. Based on standard Python type hints. I love to hear that like types are really like deeply rooted in this framework. It's kind of giving me the vibes of maybe like Node versus Dino. Yeah, I believe it's this one, the one that Reindahl is the creator of. Node is behind, kind of giving me similar vibes. Very fast, high performance on pair with Node.js and Go. Yeah, don't underestimate how fast Node.js is. Yada yada. It's I think they could like advertise more prominently that the support for async await, because I feel like async. I think I saw it here somewhere, like, or we can just, yeah, here, because that's kind of the reason why it's fast, and I believe that the world has kind of united that when it comes to REST API backends, where there's like these pieces of CPI work where you're like chewing some JSON or whatever, in between these long periods of waiting for some, basically waiting for some IO operation. I think that the world has kind of united in the opinion that this is the most appropriate solution for this particular problem. Instead of spinning threads and processes where there's an overhead of memory and context switching and that kind of stuff, and especially considering the fact that like Ruby and Python have that global interpreter log that's also kind of like throttling concurrency. I was trying to kind of like dig deeper into how it works, how async await works with Python, and pretty much works the same way as anywhere else. But while I was doing that, I discovered a really nice talk. This one from John Rees, where he really goes through the coroutines on a thread versus multiple threads or multiple processes. How to basically, the end goal is you have a CPU core, and you just want the CPU to keep being busy. You don't want to minimize these like stale periods where a CPU core is blocked on waiting on some IO. So yeah, that's FastAPI, and that's also what Polar is. Yeah, I guess I already mentioned that's what Polar is using. Polar has been a huge inspiration for me. I've been putting together a sample project we're gonna quickly go through, and it's basically, to a big degree, it's a guided version of the Polar backend. If you go to installation, there's this, pip install FastAPI. Okay, fine, good. But I was like, okay, if this is anything like the JavaScript world, if npm, basically nobody's using plain npm or npm for any serious project. You'll probably use something like pnpn because it has better caching and has additional features that npm doesn't have, such as splitting code base into multiple projects, that kind of stuff. So I was wondering if there's, something like that in the Python world. And first of all, if you try to spin up the Power backend, which is a very standard backend, as you keep reading through the instructions, you suddenly are like, okay, UV sync. Okay, we're using UV. Okay, so UV is the PNPM for Python world. Got it. Single tool to replace pip. Pip-X is, as far as I know, a tool to run tools written in Python in like their own sandbox and environments. Okay, got it. So that was kind of my question number one. Question number two was how do I, where's like project settings, how do I define dependencies and that kind of stuff. And yeah, looks like the way to do it these days is there's this pyproject.toml where you have some basic info. I guess this is more important for when you're vending a package, but not for when you're just writing a backend that you're gonna shove into a Docker container and then spin it somewhere in the cloud. Python version, sure, dependencies. FastAPI. Uvicorn is basically a low-level server that implements, as far as I know, stuff like HTTP and WebSockets, so you don't have to be dealing with like plain TCP. And FastAPI is built on top of that. There's this yet another like lower level server framework called Starlet, like shoved in between, but that's basically that's kind of an implementation detail. Okay, here's all the dependencies. Got it. Dev dependencies that you want for local development, but when you're launching it in a Docker somewhere, you don't need any of this. Got it. And there's some task API too, so you can do something like task API instead of having to type, this in the console. Got it. PyTest is for running tests. Again, got it. Code coverage, fine. Rough, okay. Rough is I was wondering, okay, what is like the linter/formatter for Python, or there's multiple, but what do the cool guys use these days? Okay, they do rough. Of course, it's written in Rust. I mean, it's the same with UV, like written in Rust. Sure, sounds good. And then you specify some linter rules. This kind of, when I saw this, I was like, why can't this, okay, ignore rule F841. Why can't this just say something like ignore rule, remove unused variables? Maybe it can be done somehow, but this seems to me, there's just some, okay, like not the most user-friendly identifier, and that's why you need to have this thing next to it. MyPy is for type checking JavaScript. It's MyPy is a separate thing. Got it. And Pydantic we'll talk about later. Okay, cool. So I have this simple project here. Okay, what does it do? I have this side project called IndiePitcher, which is basically a software as a service for sending emails. You can use this editor, or you can use the REST API or one of the SDKs on top of it to, send emails and manage your contacts, that kind of stuff. And if I go into the dashboard, the base, for the model is that you have a model representing a profile after you sign in, and a profile can belong to multiple organizations. When you belong to an organization, there's also an information like what your role is, if you're an admin or like a read-only user or something in between. You can create an organization, and there's projects and organizations and other stuff. But what I basically tried to recreate is the basic model that represents a profile and organization and organization membership to have like foreign keys and many-to-many relationship to see what it looks like in Python using FastAPI and the ORM, which is SQL model or SQL Alchemy eventually. Okay, so maybe I'll quickly go through some of the tooling that I have set up, because I'm also like used to certain things such as, I don't know, I want a debugger, I want my file to be formatted when I save it, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I have a project which is just a gutted version of what you were just looking at. Like basically all these like overrides I copied over because I believe that they know what they're doing. There's that log file to pin dependencies, Python version. I just set it to the latest version available. That's all good. And then I have configuration for Visual Studio Code. Maybe before I get to it, just a fun fact. I saw that Polar actually has, besides .vs Code, which is like configuration for Visual Studio Code, there is .z. Z, in case you didn't know, let's spread the love, is this editor, which is written in surprise Rust. And it's a new editor that is native, kind of like Sublime and others, which I find really cool. I mean, I am really impressed by how well Visual Studio works, considering the fact that it's basically a web browser. But I'm just a fan of Z, because Visual Studio is cool, but just like for me, the idea of using a editor that is quote unquote vulnerable to cross-site scripting is, but then again, I kind of finally got familiar with Visual Studio Code enough and got everything set up the way I wanted and like it. And moving to like yet another editor is like borderline, I don't know, procrastination. So just a quick shout out to Zed. I would love to spend more time with it. Visual Studio Code, some recommended extensions that I again copied from the Polar source code. Settings, again, I basically copied this over from the Polar repository. I just made sure that things that I want are here, such as format editor, format code on save. It's just something that I really used to, that I'm doing whatever I can, and when I do save it formats everything as it should be. That's cool. Remove some folders you never need from the left gallery, they're just annoying there. And then launch, which Polar has like separate target or configuration or whatever you want to call it for like the worker process and stuff. I just had this simple one, and again, something I'm used to. It's basically configuration for what happens when you tap on this button or when you run this. I have it map to command R because my main background for many years is in iOS development and I'm just used to that. I kind of remapped a lot of Visual Studio shortcuts to match what I'm used to from Xcode. And now if I go to here, yep, there we go. And as I said, I obviously when I put a breakpoint here and run this again, it breaks on that breakpoint, which is great. So yeah, let's have a quick walkthrough now. Maybe let's quickly go through the code base. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how to approach this, so maybe let's go. I will quickly go through the main file and then I'll probably go button up from the model layer to up and end up with tests. This, yeah, at its very core, you instantiate FastAPI and then you register a route, and that's what we just saw. I have other stuff shoved in, such as you probably want to, not hook into the lifespan, when before things start running, you want to instantiate database and do other stuff. Then shutdown is when the process receives a signal that it should be shut down, that it can it can interrupt. And yeah, if I opened the code of Polar, I would probably find some code here, during shutdown, that uploads some cached analytics. That's being patched for optimization reasons and that kind of stuff. And there's obviously the FastAPI takes care of stuff such as that it doesn't shut down the process in the middle of processing a request, but that would be for another discussion. Then I discovered this package for pagination that I'm using. I'm using a middleware for authentication that I'm kind of mocking. We'll get to it later. Registering route handlers. That's pretty much it. So let's take a look at the model, I guess. Yeah, looks like the ORM package to run with when it comes with FastAPI is SQL Alchemy. And from what I've checked, there is this higher level thing on top of SQL Alchemy called SQL Model. So I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. So I have a class called SQL Model. This is how you specify that you wanted to create a table. This is what the table should look like. I create an ID. I am used to using UUIDs. I believe that Polar, instead of integer-based primary keys, I believe that Polar does it as well. I mean, say this is a primary key, it should index, and actually what this is doing is that it's generating UUIDs on the client. Which I'm like, okay. You have an email and you have this validations that's all taken care of using this package called Pydantic, which is some company that seems to do a bunch of stuff. They seem to be making money by running some software as a service for logging and tracing and stuff. But they are behind this validation field called Pydantic. I wish I could somehow click through to some docs. There we go. So yeah, this is basically what it's using, both to validate database models and to validate TTOs that go in requests and out of responses for JSON schema. So yeah, you can say, so a user have an email, but that email, you can say that it should be just a string, but you can use email string that has this extra validation saying, okay, it does some regex-based validation that it's an email. And then you can specify that it should be unique, because we don't have like multiple rows in database for users with the same email. Obviously, that would make sense. We index it, sure, why not? And then a user may or may not have a name and an avatar URL. Then I want to log for pretty much every model, like created it and updated it. Created at is to track when the user was created. Updated as was like the last update, which if I update the model, aka the row, by, I don't know, changing its name or something like that, this gets automatically updated. Here's this banned add. We mark that user as banned to ban them, so they're doing some shady stuff that they cannot log in anymore. It's kind of a better practice than adding some bool like is banned. This can carry the same information, and on top of that, you actually track when the user was banned. Then this last CNET, which is kind of for like analytics stuff, and then to see like some support for preform data or like dictionaries backed by JSON. This is a dictionary of string to add like some attribution data for when a user registers, and it's going to be treated as a JSON internally. And this is a relationship that I'll talk about a bit later. And then we have an organization, same stuff, name. Again, can be any string, but we don't want an empty string, which would be allowed otherwise if you just said, string or null. And created it, updated the same, membership. So we the way this is modeled, I kind of already touched on that, is that a user can belong to multiple organizations. And when a user belongs to an organization, we want to bundle with that information the role of the user. Is that user an admin? Is that user a guest? You can interpret it as that the user has only read-only access when the user is a guest. Like if I go to Indie Picture and click on contacts, and maybe a user with guest type would not be able to create a contact, and only a user with an admin permission can lead an organization. And what was the third thing here? A member can post things such as, add members, send emails, but they cannot like delete a project. So yeah, that's how you can interpret it as an example. And so this is how it's modeled. You need to have a new table because of that. And you have foreign keys for a profile and an organization. You have this on-delete cascade, which means that when I delete a user, this gets deleted as well automatically. You don't need to delete it manually. Sometimes with certain things you want to like set it to null instead, but this is not the case. Same with an organization. If I delete an organization, I'm obviously not a member of it anymore, or like nobody is, so all these get deleted. Kind of. This is that role. This is the same stuff. And here, yes, you can kind of load when you query, hey, give me a membership based on ID or like all membership. You can also pre-populate the profile and organization, which is nothing else than joining tables under the hood. And this is the other side of it. When I query an organization, I can also grab a list of memberships that are on this organization, or if I query my profile, I can populate this, which loads using the same query. What did I just do? That you can... How do I get rid of this? Anyway, you can preload a list of memberships, of organizations I belong to. So that's the model layer. Then we move to the routes. This is just a collection of endpoints that belong to certain domain. These are endpoints for dealing with profiles, endpoints for dealing with organizations, which are just wrapped in a class, and then they're imported and added here. And then you can see that if I do this, FastAPI kind of generates OpenAPI docs behind the scenes, and it also has this visual representation of it. So you can see I have endpoints for profiles and of dealing with profiles and organizations. I didn't do endpoints for like inviting profiles to organizations and that kind of stuff. All right, let's keep rolling. So let's take a look at profile. So this is a route for when you do post profile. First of all, I have a dedicated model because you don't want to just dump out everything you have stored in a database. Multiple reasons, ranging from security to performance. You want to have these DTOs, and as you can see, this is the same thing. It's using the email, and I just realized that I should probably also set on the profile model that if it has a name, it should be it should have a minimum length, and I would assume there is some URL string. I'm not going to search for it right now. Maybe I need to download some extensions package, but I'm pretty sure there is there's email string. There should be like some, URL or HTTP string, something like that. Anyway. So this is what is returned, and then a request can have dependencies. Here's the actual request that we want to get to grab headers from it that we're going to use for the attribution. FastAPI supports these background tasks, which, if I go to the very bottom of this, you can see that we have this background task that we schedule that internally sends a welcome email to the user. If we look inside, it's just a function that uses something called email service that I'll explain in a bit, and sends an email. I could totally replace this for this, but the difference is that you can imagine that this is backed by some REST API call to something like IND picture or resend, or maybe like SMTP, and these requests tend to take some time. They may take like 100 milliseconds, and if you did it in line like this, you would basically delay returning of the response you already have in here by those 100 milliseconds or whatever. So if you do this background task, you basically kick this to execute like in here right after it returns the response. So basically this is how we shave like whatever the API call to send an email would take from the execution time of handling the request, if I'm making sense. It seems to be only very, very basic, though, if you want like a big queuing, something that takes like all the queuing tasks with scheduling a job to run in 5 minutes and handle retries if it fails for some reason, and scheduling cron jobs every 5 minutes or whatever. That's you need to do something else for that. It's the options are you can use Celery, but as I was digging through the Polar code base, it looks like they at some point swapped Celery for something called Arc. Which I guess is something like how FastAPI is implemented for Django. This is like a more modern take on what Celery is doing. And yeah, you can go through the documentation. It's backed by Redis. I was briefly looking at it. I wish there was like an easy way to mock it with some in-memory driver for like tests and stuff. There doesn't seem to be, but obviously Python is a highly dynamic language, so you can, worst case scenario, you can just mock basically the Redis driver or something like that. But yep, that's something I didn't play with, but yep. I'm always curious, especially how these things handle like graceful shutdown that I already mentioned and stuff like that. Okay, but going back up, okay, we get the Firebase user because the way I'm doing authentication, I'm kind of mimicking how it works in the real indie picture backend, which, by the way, I guess I didn't mention it, is written in Swift, actually, language Swift, with a framework called Vapor. And I don't have the backend itself open source at this point, but if you were interested, I have this starter template on GitHub, which is like a guided version of the backend, which implements basically what we have here plus some more. So yeah, if you were interested in what this looks like, what writing a backend using Swift looks like, you can check this out. And yeah, I'm using Firebase. I kind of outsource off to using Firebase. There's 101 or like 1001 services these days you can outsource off to Firebase, off being one of them, Supabase off. There's Clerk that seems to be quite popular. Or you can roll out your own. As you can see, like on there's like no password on profile, but you can roll your own and then do JWT based off, where you kind of rent JWT tokens from your backend. Or you can just use sessions and cookies, that's... So yeah, basically you get a Firebase user that maybe I made a mistake and I should have gone through the middleware here. So yeah, what is a middleware? Middleware is something that you shove to the... It's a logic that you can inject around a request. As you can see, you get an incoming request and you can do things to it. And I'm doing off. First of all, I have checks. I have these 3 PEPs that I don't want to have under, authentication. So I just call next. Okay, process this request, which basically what it does is that the process keeps going and may end up, for instance, right here being pushed in. You call a route PEP handler that's executes this. And otherwise, I checked if the request has a header called authorization. And if I check if it's a bearer type, that's kind of expected. If it isn't, I return an error response. And one thing that I find annoying, maybe it's just some skill issues and it can be a way to do it, but if you if I quickly go to, let's say, organizations, I have these checks here, such as when you try to get an organization and you're not a member of that organization, we raise an exception. I chose to throw 404, so it's kind of security through obscurity that when you're not authenticated, you don't know if such organization doesn't exist or if you don't have access to it. Otherwise, you could do something like 403. But anyway, and what happens is that if I go, I don't have it open anywhere anymore. It's a shame. Let me copy this again. If I go to /prof, I get error missing token. And basically what happens is that I haven't checked the implementation, but I assume it works like in other framework, that there is a middleware very early on in FastAPI that catches this exception and interprets this detail into a JSON like this. And I would love to use it in a middleware as well. So if there's something wrong, I would basically do the same thing. I would do raise HTTP exception, and this would get caught by the middleware, and the same logic would turn this into a JSON. But when I did that, I would just be getting these like weird 500 errors. Yeah, maybe there's a way to configure it, but I kind of gave up, and I just manually construct the response that says, okay, it's going to be a JSON that has a field code detail, and now I have like the logic that's what the JSON for an error response should look like at two different places, which I'm not a fan of, obviously. But yeah, you get the token, and then I don't know if you're familiar with JWT tokens, but you basically verify the signature to make sure that no one was messing with that. And once the signature is verified, you can trust the data that's inside of it, and the data about like user ID and user ID as registered by Firebase Auth or whatever service you're using, and email and stuff. You would actually get it from the JWT token. In here, I'm kind of mocking it, and if you do token, Peter token or John token, these obviously don't have the format of a JWT token to begin with, but it's just to quickly test stuff. I didn't feel like I would really learn anything new by integrating like Firebase admin and or something that would like verify and parse the token. I store the data on the request. There's this storage thing called state, which is basically a dictionary, and you can add it there. Now, if I go to profile, you somehow get Firebase token. Okay, which is this Firebase Auth token, which is just a model that I have that I could also add a validation zeroed name, or that this cannot be nil and this should be in the URL and stuff. But okay, there's this depends. The FastAPI has dependency injection for these baked in. So you do like depends and get Firebase user from request. What is that? That is a method that actually needs dependencies as well, and it needs a request, and FastAPI just does the right thing, kind of like caches when it comes to caching and stuff of dependencies, like within the context of a request. And so yeah, I need access to a request, because as I just show you, we get the request from this the info from the state request state, and I basically just create a Firebase user and return it. That's how you get the Firebase user data. Then there's a database, which is, yeah, that was interesting. You basically get something, you quite often see this called session, but I just decided to call it DB because it makes more sense to me. It's a DB, even though it's like technically a database session. Could also call it database transaction, because that's what it is, really. It like automatically opens a transaction from what I've seen. And but since we're using async everywhere, we need to get this async session and regular session to begin with. Most tutorials just use the regular session, and there's this method to get DB session. This is where I do database setup. For convenience, like many tutorials and stuff, I'm using SQLite instead of like spinning up local Postgres in Docker and using that. But then I have this little hack. There's certainly, I guess, more elegant ways to do this, but it works. I open different database based on whether I'm like running the local server like I am now, or when I'm running tests that we'll get to in a bit. So I don't like, I don't know, when I'm developing, when I have the backend running locally and I'm developing like again some front end, and so I don't want to, whatever state I'm in, to be messed up with, running tests. And you create async engine, because we own everything async, based in the database URL. This echo true is printing out the raw queries it's performing, I believe, which again should be something like if debug, or and then you have this session maker, and get DB session basically opens a session for the duration of the request. This is this obscure code with like yielding. It took me a bit to wrap my head around it, and I don't think I have time to go deeper into it right now, but it basically, opens the session. Then in here you basically run the body of the response, and then it goes here and it automatically I believe rollbacks the session by default, unless you committed it. Then I have like nuke db to that's only used for tests, and the init db is used here. You've seen that already. This is when you want to import everything from running module. This is like the things to import, and I believe so. Yeah, that's how you get a database. Then I like to wrap things that you don't want to actually run for, like various third-party services, like for sending emails. Maybe you don't actually want to be sending emails when you're just developing locally. You definitely don't want to be sending actual emails when you're running unit tests or analytics. That's just something I'm used to doing. I tend to create these services, which is I quite often interpret as a protocol. And then you can have something like mock, or you can call it no-op analytics service that doesn't really do anything. And then when you're running in production, you can have something like Mixpanel analytics service or postdoc analytics service that uses Mixpanel or postdoc internally. And then this is the, again, dependency. And I guess in here you could have something like, if env production return postdoc analytics service, otherwise return mock or no analytics service. That's all there is to it. And yeah, in here we just execute a database query. Hey, give me a profile with this email if it already exists. Update the information we have about that user in postdoc or whatever we're using and return it. Otherwise, let's create a new user. Let's get headers, filter out headers that are somehow like sensitive. We don't necessarily want to log that. On top of that, we want to grab the user's IP. And we create a new profile. We add it to the trend section, not to the database, to the trend section that's not committed yet. And we do flush. So what this flush frequently does is that it does things like it would assign ID to the profile model, but we're generating in client side, so this doesn't really do anything. But I guess I'm just keeping it there because if in the future or it doesn't do any. And then yeah, if we weren't generating the ID client side, you would refresh the profile like this to get updated with the ID. And then we have this logic that when we create a profile, we want to create a default organization for that profile. And we want to create this membership to glue it together. And what's going on here is that all of these are part of one database transaction. So if any of these fail for some reason, like nothing gets created, so you don't end up in a scenario where you create a user, you create an organization, but then you somehow don't manage to create the membership information for it. So this is the commit. Then we do the identify. We could in theory also kick this to an async task, but I just didn't bother in this case. And then as a convenience thing, I also have this dependency that basically gets the Firebase user that it gets from the token, and then it looks up the user in the database, and so you can grab a user. Another thing that would be useful would be get profile ID from request, because sometimes you don't need the full to like query the full profile, you just need the ID to work with that. And delete is the same thing. You want to delete the user, but before you delete the user, you want to go through all the organizations and find organizations where I am the last admin and delete those organizations as well. So that's going on here. Organizations, yeah, this is the models to when you want to create an organization and update it. And response, again, you don't want to dump the entire organization or the data you have in a database. And this is an endpoint to get to basically paginate organizations. And I added this plugin that basically takes care of all the logical paginating for me, which so it doesn't return like an array of organization response, it returns a page. What does it do? If we look, first of all, you have these, I'm not sure what this X is, to be honest, to take a look, but you have, it automatically adds these params page and size that you can use for paging. And if we look at the response, successful response, here you get the items, and it also tells you that it adds metadata such as how many pages there are, like what page you're on, the total amount of organizations. You can query that kind of stuff. So that's pretty nice. Then you can get an organization by ID. This is the ID that matches to this. So you inject it, you get a profile, you get DB. This is like the description that gets printed here. And we want to get an organization, but there's these checks that, hey, is this user actually a member of that organization before we return it? The same here. We use those, that eager loading, aka join, to check that, to limit this to, instead of like returning all organizations, that only return organizations this user actually has access to. Post, this is how you inject the data that you want to be passed, or data. If we look at the post, yeah, just the name. At this point, we can only pass the name and profile and DB, and you create a new organization. You add yourself as a member. Again, all of this is one transaction. Like if you create organization, but somehow, I don't know, something fails when you're creating a membership, you don't want a dangling organization you don't have access to. So, and yeah, the same with delete. We just check if you're an admin. You need to be an admin to be able to delete an organization. Patch, very similar. Commit, refresh organization, return it. There's probably like a fancier way to do it and then like mapping it manually like this, but it works. Okay, so that's about it. Maybe the last thing we can quickly take a look at is tests. Let's hope I didn't break anything. If I what changes did I make here? Just white spaces, okay. So you use PyTest to run tests. If I just do PyTest in the console, I hope that the tests are still passing. Yeah, I need to take a closer look at the warnings, but yeah, we have tests passing. It seems to be a common practice to have tests like in a separate directory. I have two test suites. One is for profile endpoints, one is for test organizations. And another thing is that you have these things to be able to run tests one by one. If I option click on it, I can run it with debugger attached, so breakpoint. I would like to configure this to be like always debug session, because pretty much always want that.